A deal on Dickens, who could resist? A stack of Austen, warmly kissed. Golden Age crime tales twist and turn, every page a treasure to learn. Books keep coming home with me, piles so tall they're all I see. Turn a page and sail the sea, reading always feels so free.
Hi, my name is Talia. Welcome to Talia Nerds Out. I have a little bit of time, so I figured I would just record a quick review video. Haven't finished reviewing all the books that I read earlier in the year, so I was like, oh, probably should do that now. So I finished this book quite a bit earlier in the year. Let's see, when was that finished? Yeah. So that would have been finished. Okay, so that was my March read. So yes, this was finished towards the end of, I might have even finished it the month after because I think I had a free month in between. So I might have finished, yeah, I might have finished in April. So what am I even talking about? This is Mornings on Horseback by David McCullough. This is the first biography I read by David McCullough. Currently I'm reading Truman, which is, you know, in comparison, quite the chunker. Where Truman is, you know, over 1,000 pages. The Mornings on Horseback was about 445, it looks like. So, about half of Truman. But I really enjoyed this book. First of all, it started out brilliantly, in my opinion. I read the introduction, and he starts off with a reference to Arsenic and Old Lace, which I love. I grew up watching Arsenic and Old Lace, and, you know, the brother of Cary Grant's character, or I'm just going to call him the brother. He does a perfect Teddy Roosevelt type, because of course, if you haven't watched the movie, it doesn't really give anything away to say that his brother is a little touched and believes that he is Teddy Roosevelt. And they talk about things like the Panama Canal and things like that during the course of the movie. But I really love that the way that McCullough introduces the book is by talking about Arsenic and Old Lace. But of course, that is not the whole of the book. McCullough decided that there are plenty of books about the full course of Teddy's time in office. So he decided that he was going to not just focus on Teddy's story, but on the story of his family. And by his family, he means like, I think he went from grandparents, not tons of grandparents, but mostly like some of the grandparents, but mostly parents and his siblings to a certain point. I think sometimes it can be easy to miss. You might just see Mornings on Horseback and Teddy and then go, oh, okay, this is just about Teddy Roosevelt. But the subtitle is The Story of an Extraordinary Family, a Vanished Way of Life, and the Unique Child Who Became Theodore Roosevelt. And apparently he didn't actually like going by Teddy. He went by, I think it was Thee, especially after his father passed. Which I thought was interesting, that what we all know him as, for the most part, is not even the name that he went by, at least not at this point of his life. I believe that the book it ends like right before he becomes president. And I had so many things that I enjoyed about this book. First of all, it was very well written. It plays to David McCullough's strengths, which are his biographical writing. Usually when I've found him to be dry is when he focuses on aspects other than the biography, which has been the case when you're dealing with the Johnstown flood, although there's a lot of mini biographies in that. I didn't feel like the Great Bridge really heated up until I was able to he really focused in on Washington Roebling. And the same thing for The Path Between the Seas. I had a really hard time getting into that one because I was having a hard time really connecting to someone that I liked within that story. Actually, I was having the opposite problem where I really actively disliked one of the people, and that does bear testament to his writing as well. But this is the first one that is a pure biography in a way that his previous writing was not. Oh, and Brave Companions was just like a bunch of mini biographies. But this is his first full-on, even though it stops right before the presidency. I enjoyed where he discusses things about Roosevelt's health when he was a boy, things like his asthma and how bad it really was. And I really appreciate how much time he took going through and describing what it would have been like for Teddy, and I'm continuing to call him Teddy just because that's how everyone thinks of him. And plus you have two Theodores. You have his father, and then you have our Theodore. He was called TD, I believe, when he was younger. But when he went to Harvard, he started going by Thee. But I really appreciated the effort McCullough went into to really give you a good grasp of how much the asthma affected Teddy as a child and his family, to the point where they really had to structure how they did things around his asthma attacks. And I also appreciate the fact that McCullough apparently went and interviewed doctors, family members, patients who had experienced childhood, who are familiar with and or experienced personally the childhood asthma. And even if they had grown out of it, he's talking about how it could be hard for some of these patients to discuss it, either because, they're kind of afraid they would like thinking about it would almost like trigger an attack or something, or because they just didn't really want to think about how that felt because it was very frightening. Talking about, because Teddy would get full on blue, almost stopping breathing. Sounds like it was very terrifying. And like I said, I really appreciate that McCullough took the time to really make sure the reader understood how big of a deal this was. Because I kind of knew that Teddy was sick as a kid, but I didn't realize how bad the asthma attacks were. The other thing that I enjoyed about this was really the discussion that came in with the Civil War, dealing with that within Teddy's family, about how his mother came from the South and his father was, of course, from the North. I believe they were actually New York. So you had within that family that a bit of tension there. They made agreement not to really speak about the politics at home, but there was definitely a feeling of tension because there was that view. Like, Teddy had uncles who were involved with the Confederacy, as well as having family members who would have been pro, I don't know why my brain's not braining, who would have been for the Union there. But I thought it was interesting. I hadn't been aware of it, but it kind of, I wasn't surprised once I heard about it, where they said that there would be men of higher status who came from richer families who would, rather than go into the war themselves, they would pay for someone else to go for them, which was not something I had heard about before. Although in retrospect, I'm not terribly surprised that you would have some of these highly influential families not doing everything they can to keep their young men from going to war. Now, I'm sure there were ones who chose to, but apparently it was not an unusual thing to see some of your New York elites, or maybe, I don't know if the elites in some of the other cities as well, just go like, yeah, no, I'll pay for someone to take my spot. So yeah, that was an interesting there were some interesting tidbits just surrounding the time period, things about Harvard culture at that time, because it sounds like Harvard was really coming together as an entity at that point. And sorry, I'm really dry. The other thing that I really enjoyed, and actually ended up being really bad for me, is a section where it discussed Teddy's time. It wasn't with the Rough Riders. It was his time, though, doing ranching. And I was surprised how short of a time period it was. I think he had like 1 or 2 seasons, and then he went back to New York. But what I enjoyed about that section is it talked about and brought in other people like Remington. And apparently when my family lived in Texas, I was born in Texas, as was my sister. Neither of us remember. Basically, my parents were stationed there, had us, and then left. But they got stationed elsewhere after that point. But when they were there, I guess they went to the Remington museum that was there. So we have Remington like replicas in the house. And I do have, and I don't feel like pulling it out because it's a big book and it would like disarrange everything I have over here. But I have a big book of Remington's artwork, which will probably then go where the family can access it, because along with all the other random art books we have in the house, we plan on putting where people can access them eventually. But the stuff Teddy's book started making me interested, and then of course Brave Companions continued that thread, because I believe it even had a whole section on Remington. But that was something I enjoyed, and I also enjoyed hearing about the author of The Virginian, who actually, and I'm trying to find his name because it escapes me currently. The author had actually dedicated The Virginian to Teddy, which I thought was cool because I hadn't been aware of that when I read it, or maybe I just didn't notice when I read it in high school. I'm so sorry, excuse me. Yeah, I'm not finding it here. Oh, because this is time actually at school. Oh, was he actually Cambridge, not Harvard? Maybe he was Cambridge. For some reason, I thought he was Harvard. Okay, so he was actually Cambridge, I guess. Well, I know that he chose his... I was pretty sure he chose his school for the science program. Well, here he was mentioning Harvard again. Well, maybe... Now it's confusing me. I could have sworn he was Harvard. Okay, maybe Cambridge was just being mentioned as sort of an aside. But much later, they, I'm trying to find, that was after his Harvard period. Well, I can't find exactly what I was looking for to get the author's name. But, yeah, I thought it was really interesting that the Virginia was dedicated to him. And then also, it made a point, and again, I'm not sure if this is Brave Companions that mentioned it or if it was this book, that 3 of the men who were so influential in forming the common perception of the West were all were all city guys, and they spent a short period of time there and did like all their writing and artwork and stuff back home, which I thought was very interesting, that you had 3 Easterners writing a lot of these, forming the common perception of the West and creating this idea/ideal. But I need to read Teddy's book about that period of time, because apparently he did nonfiction. Then you had is it Owen Wister? I feel like that might be the name. The guy who wrote The Virginian, who did the fiction, and then you have, of course, Remington, who is the art. But yeah, I also, for some reason, didn't really know that I didn't know much about Teddy's marriage, how young he was. Sorry, my alarm went off. I hadn't realized that, I'm trying to remember what I was going to say. Anyway, yeah, I really enjoyed this book. And I'm trying to look through my notes here. I have little teddy bear sticky notes. I'm just trying to make sure there's nothing here that yeah, I think that's about all that I have to say. I don't want to give away too much about this. I almost picked up a book on a politician during the era, and if I could find his name, I'll mention it. But I believe it's when Teddy was, I don't even think he was running for office himself. Okay, yeah, here we go. It was John R. Lynch, a black delegate from Mississippi. And I actually, for some reason, didn't realize that there were politicians already in place who were black that early after the Civil War, because I mean, the Civil War was fought when Teddy was a kid. I hadn't realized that already there were representatives. And I mean, at this point, this was even a former congressman, which means that it was even earlier than whatever year this was. Okay, I believe this was 18... Give me a year. Okay, I can't find a year. But this might be 1876. Feels like it's a bit early. I wish I could find the actual year. Anyway, I still, regardless as to what the exact year was, I hadn't realized how close to the Civil War you already had politicians in place. And I wanted to read more about John R. Lynch, because he wrote, I want to say, at least one autobiography. And he wrote something else. And I was going to pick them up, and I was like, let me hold off and make sure it's something I really am very passionate about for reading, because, I have a bad habit of getting a vague interest in something, and then later on I'll lose that interest and then wonder why I picked up the book to begin with, because I'm very distractible and very easily inclined to pick up a book because something, like I said, just vaguely caught my interest. So if I still am thinking about John R. Lynch later, and I feel like, oh yeah, no, I really want to read more about him, I might pick up one of his books. But yeah, I thought that was interesting. But I'm not really sure what else I want to say about this. I really enjoyed learning about Teddy's family. I really enjoyed learning about New York during this period. I hadn't realized quite how rich Teddy's family was. And really that probably helped enable him to have maybe a better childhood than he would have had otherwise with that asthma, because it was debilitating, and not every family would have been able to cater to the needs of a child with asthma the way his family was able to, and especially with the severity of it that he had. And it was interesting how both he and his brother, who each had health issues at different points in their lives, it was later for his brother, but how that did improve for each of them when they would go out and kind of rough it a bit, go and do the ranching, do all that kind of stuff. That helped improve their health. I'm not sure if it was just all the being out in the fresh air, because that had helped Teddy during his asthma attacks as well, was just being out in the fresh air. It was just very interesting. And for some reason, I didn't realize how scientifically minded Teddy was either. It was just a very interesting early look at him before he got into the White House. I actually appreciate that it stopped right before the White House, because I felt like it gave you a better snapshot of him as a person without all the distractions of everything with his presidency. I think that does deserve its own other book, and I believe I know there's a good 2-volume collection. I can't remember who wrote it, but I think I have it on Kindle. If I'm really interested, I might pick it up physically and read it at some point. But because I think that has like his Rough Rider days, maybe there probably is more detail on things that have to do with his life away from the family. This, I felt, was very focused on Teddy's familial relationships and his early life. So I would recommend this book. I do think that maybe if you're looking for something that's a little bit more about Teddy as a politician, this probably won't be the book for you. But as someone who really enjoyed learning about Teddy's asthma attacks, learning about the way his family formed him, I would highly recommend this book. I believe I gave this book 5 stars. If I didn't, I should have. So I don't really have a whole lot more to say about this book other than to, once again, recommend it. Have you read this book? Did you feel like stopping right before the presidency was a good move on McCullough's part? Do you wish that he had gone farther? Do you think that he should have gone farther? Or do you think, I know that, I want to say when she read this, and Ariane, correct me if I'm wrong, I want to say that you felt like it focused too much on Teddy's family. Now, I personally enjoy that because they did mention at the beginning that that was the intention, was to not just focus on Teddy, but to focus on the people who sort of made him who he was. So I went into that expecting that. Oh, I also appreciate that they mentioned how horrible Teddy's spelling was. I thought that was a little bit of a fun little side note. Now, I switched between reading this book and listening to it because McCullough actually has a very good reader for his books. I am doing the same thing with Truman. So it was nice to be able to switch back and forth. Eventually, I did switch over to reading it completely. But when I would listen to it, I would go back and highlight if something caught my interest, like with the parts about asthma. But yeah, there's a lot in here that I could talk about. It's been a while since I've read it, but it did stick in my head. I can see myself reading it again. Definitely my favorite book of his that I've finished so far. Truman's very good right now as well. I'm not quite sure which I would put, above the other. Right now, I think I'm inclined to like Mornings on Horseback better, but we'll see. I'm only 20% into Truman. Truman's a thick book and there's a lot to it. Now, Truman does what maybe he could have done with Mornings on Horseback, but I'm thinking that it would have been even thicker to do Teddy Roosevelt as it was to do Truman. So you could have had you would have a huge book if you try to do the detail he did at the beginning, which, he did a lot of detail at the beginning for Truman as well. So I can only imagine the thickness of a full-on biography with the detail that was put into Mornings on Horseback. And I would rather have him focus on the one time period than to sacrifice the detail of the family history, because that's part of what I love about this book. That is what I love about this book. Okay, so for the, fifth or sixth time, I am finished now. Truly, really, maybe. Thank you very much for joining me. I hope that you got something out of this book review. I will see you again next time. God bless. Bye.
Books keep coming home with me, piles so tall they're all I see. Turn a page and sail the sea. Reading always feels so free.